Okay, I'll show my awful glasses now. Okay, welcome everybody to the February People Policy Development Committee. First item on the agenda is apologies for absence.
Yeah, we've got apologies from Councillors Matthew Jones and Leslie Walton.
Okay, thanks, Alison. The second item on the agenda is disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests. And for those, then the third item on the agenda is the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held in January. Are we all happy to move those minutes?
Can I just raise one thing?
Yeah, of course.
On page 3, very bottom, page 3.
Yeah.
I didn't realise that we were in the restaurant business. Second bullet point, resolved that the WOC plan be approved. Be working. So should I read it?
That's a typo, obviously, from me. Sorry, apologies.
Eagle-eyed, Steve.
So I'm happy to agree that.
Okay, good. You happy to second them, Jan?
Yes, happy to do that.
I can see Erica's joining us now. Hi, Erica. Okay, on to the first item proper then, item 4, the financial assessment guidance for social services. I think Amy Hawkins has joined us, and Amy has a presentation, I believe. Amy, is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Do you want me to go straight into it?
Yeah.
It's a PowerPoint. I only 5 slides. Okay, I'm not going to hopefully go too much into this. So I'll just share my screen. Just be aware I can't. Oh, that's too much. I can't see everybody when it's shared. So I'll just go through this. So just to update you, this was something that we wanted to bring 6 months ago. It's a piece of work that we've been looking at, but obviously with Omicron and the increased waves and demand in terms of COVID, you know, it's been slightly delayed, but it's a really key piece of work that we do want to bring forward. So we've got the charging policy, the social services charging policy. This allows us to charge people for residential services, for day services, but when we do that, everyone doesn't pay the same flat rate. Sorry if I'm stating the obvious, but just put some of the key points on it. Every individual has a financial assessment, and there's a maximum amount that they pay if it's day services, or if it's residential, it will be financially assessed on their means. So there's approximately 5,000 financial assessments that are carried out every year for charging, and that's actually just, sorry, I say every year, that was based on last year's figures, and of course with COVID there was slightly less services available in terms of day services and other things, so other years it could be higher. So we haven't actually got financial assessment guidance at the moment. We have a financial charging policy. It's really comprehensive. It's excellent. Simon on the call, who develops it every year and makes sure it's refreshed and up to date in terms of legislation. So we do have the charging policy. Charging policy is about 35-40 pages long. It's not necessarily it's very useful for the public, but it's not a guidance document, you know. So what we thought needed to go alongside it was a draft financial assessment guidance, so like a user's guide. So I'm not giving you a presentation on the guidance itself. I'm just telling you the gist of it, because what I'm going to do afterwards is share it or explain what the next steps are in terms of financial guidance. So within the guidance that's just drafted at the moment, we've got the process to explain to these 5,000 individuals who go through this process annually, what the process is, what's required in terms of the guidance, the information that's required, because again, that level of detail isn't in the policy. So this is very much meant to be a user's guide. Also an explanation around general expenses. So as mentioned, we don't charge people, sorry, I probably didn't mention this. We need to ensure that we take into consideration people's living costs and then how much income that they should have left after we've charged them. So there are, we ensure that what can be included in terms of the financial assessment. There's also an element called disability related expenditure. So there's an allowance that's given in terms of disability related expenditure. So that's additional income people are able to keep so they don't get charged. Statutory amounts, so statutory amounts in terms of the assessment. So there's just some explanation. Sorry, sliding off the screen slightly. And what this does, the process of the financial assessment guidance, is ensure we leave people within a minimum income amount. I'll just give a bit more detail on that. So within the crumbs, I'm not having much joy. Sorry, let me format the screen a little bit better. Okay. Within the draft guidance, there's also information about which care and support services we charge for, and which services we don't charge for. So, for example, as mentioned already, we charge for residential domiciliary care, lifeline, day services, and in terms of care home costs, residential costs is usually up to the full cost of the care home, but then based on someone's financial assessment. So, you know, it might be nothing that they end up paying, or it might be the full costs. With day services and everything non-residential, there's a £100 cap on the amount people charge. And again, some people pay nothing, some people will pay £100 a week, depending on their own personal circumstances. So there's a review of the charges in terms of what people pay, and there's also a personal assessment, so based on everyone's individual circumstances. So that's included in the guidance. In terms of the sorry, I might have gone through this already. We tell people what is and isn't included in the financial assessment itself. So, for example, most income isn't included in the financial assessment. Some benefits also aren't included as well, so they're sort of separate to the process. Everybody is left with a minimum income amount after they've been charged for the service. So there's never a situation where we charge people £100 and they only have £100. You know, if they only had £100, we would assess them, and the chances are they wouldn't have a charge. Everybody gets a basic entitlement, so a sort of basic level of income, and then we add on top of that 35%, which is for living costs, so that's to go towards sort of rent, electricity, etc. And then there's a 10% added to that again for disability related expenditure. So that's our minimum income amount. This is very much dependent on people's individual circumstances. So Swansea has 51 different categories that we apply in terms of minimum income amounts. And this can range from somebody on no benefits. So, for example, if there's an 18 to 25-year-old on no benefits, the amount of basic entitlement plus the 35% plus the 10% would be £85.84 a week that we'd leave them with, whatever happened after they were charged. So if their income was, actually I can't do a quick example, but you know, that's what people would be left with. This goes right up to the maximum entitlement that we've got at the moment is £307.46 per week that we leave people with, and this is all based on different benefits people are on. So if somebody's you know, not working or claiming universal credits, plus they've got a carer's allowance, or it could be somebody who's got a employment support allowance, so on one of the legacy benefits, plus the enhanced disability premium, they get a different entitlement. So it's all based on the benefits people have had. And the rationale for that is because they've already been assessed for those benefits and said that they're the living costs that people need based on the benefit system. So yeah, that's the situation. This has been raised previously, or we've had some queries about this because there's been some cases in England. There's a case called the Norfolk case where it's been questioned about this minimum income amounts, and it's quite interesting. So we've done some assurance checks really in terms of the amount of entitlements that we allow, and the fact that we've got 51, I think we're quite comfortable that we're making enough allowances for individuals rather than just having one basic entitlement. But again, another reason perhaps why we need the financial guidance. You know, we want to make this really clear to people, just to make it as easy as possible so people understand the process. So the next steps in terms of the guidance itself, so I haven't obviously shared the guidance, I've just told you the sort of process. We want to ensure participation in the development of the guidance. So there is a draft version at the moment. Unfortunately, it's not full co-production. You know, we're not starting with a blank sheet of paper because there's a lot of criteria that we have to follow. So there's the Welsh Government charging policy, there's the our council's charging policy, and there's a number of requirements that we have to meet, and certain elements around the level of benefits, etc., that we can't tweak. But that said, there is a lot we can develop in terms of the guidance, and we want to make it as user-friendly as possible. So the next steps are we're sharing it with our social work teams, because they're often the ones who are working with individuals around the financial assessments, along with the it's been developed, sorry, I should say, with our social care client finance team as well. So they've been very much involved in the development of it. So, and they're also a team who works with people around the financial assessments. We've got a co-production direct payment forum. So these are individuals who are in receipt of direct payments, and organisations, in fact, who deliver services paid for by individuals' direct payments. So it's a useful co-production forum. We've got Parent Carers Forum in Swansea as well, so we'll be sharing the information with them. And obviously you as PDC, we want to share this with you, and just to get comments. This is the start of the process. There are other groups and partners as well. We'd want to share it with third sector organisations and others. And just to say, but that said, we do want to get to a situation of having guidance documents. So it might be sort of version 1, and then we go through it, because I think at the moment that the charging policy is very comprehensive, but it doesn't explain to people, what they need to provide. So the more information, the better. And just to say the final formats, we will obviously make sure it's a bilingual document, but also easy read as well. So we'll make sure it's available in other formats. So I just wanted to give you a bit of a flavour of where we are, and yeah, any questions or comments really on that?
Okay, thanks, Amy. That's really interesting. Anybody want to come in and ask make a comment or ask a question of Amy at this moment? Hannah?
Hi, thanks, Amy. I'm just wondering how comprehensive this is to some people who are in particularly vulnerable and difficult circumstances, and how well it's explained, because I know that there are some people in my ward who, although they've received a lot of paperwork about things, they're not necessarily very clear on which parts are specific to them, and it's sometimes led to some quite difficult circumstances. I mean, I'm thinking in particular of somebody in my ward who, an elderly couple, low income, and someone recently their husband had to go into a care home, and he sadly died not long afterwards. And just after he died, she received a bill from the council, and she had absolutely no idea that it was coming, and that had not been explained to her at all. And it was obviously very, very distressing, and it was pretty much the entire amount that he had left was taken with the care home bill. Now, they'd had discussions with the care home itself, who'd been who'd explained quite a lot about the billing, but I think there had been a lot of confusion about what the council was going to cover and what it wasn't going to cover. And I was just wondering if there are going to be any improvements made in how this is explained to people in very vulnerable situations, and how we can avoid things like these bills arriving when people have just died and their partners are obviously not really in a very good state to deal with it.
Yeah, can I come back on that? Do you know, that's exactly the reason why we're doing this. You know, that case that we don't want these situations. There is more that can be done in that particular case study, if that's okay. Sorry. With that, not case study, that individual, there is more to be done around the timing, isn't there, of, you know, when things get sent and what get explained. But I think the whole point of the guidance is we want to make sure that the conversations are had in an appropriate time with individuals, you know, and when they're ready to have that conversation. So that's what I was saying there could be things learned there, but also around the discussions that the care home are having, our social work team are having, the others are having when the placement's been discussed as well. So it is exactly that type of example of why we're doing this. And yeah, I suppose in that particular case, if it's still live, you know, in terms of still ongoing, you know, we'd be happy to pick that up outside the meeting as well and see what we can lessons learned, but also if there's anything that can be done now as well.
Yeah, okay, thank you, that would be helpful.
Thanks, Hannah. Anybody else want to come in and ask anything with Amy? Because it seems to me a very important piece of work, actually. Anybody want to make a comment or ask Amy anything at this point?
I'm just wondering, Kerry, is there an easy read sort of thing that would make it easier for people to understand it? Because sometimes things can get complicated anyway, it can be put pretty straightforward.
Yeah, our plan certainly is to do an easy read version of it, but also the point of having a draft version now that we share with as many people as possible is to get many eyes on it, to sort of say, does this make sense to everybody? And if you're in that situation, would this make sense to you? But we're definitely doing an easy read version as well, which is quite often where we use pictorial versions to support as well. But there are staff who will support, you know, our team do support people with financial assessments. And what I should have said is another reason to get more of this information is also to promote entitlements, so people are getting the maximum benefit entitlement. So on one hand, this is about the charging policy and making sure people are have the right information provided so they can be charged fairly and effectively, and then also that we can highlight where somebody, you know, if they're not getting the full benefit entitlement, that we can promote, you know, signpost them to our partners in Citizens Advice or via our welfare rights team if there's some sort of appeal or support. So yeah, it's to try and sort of get that holistic support.
Okay, Katie, do you want to come in?
Yeah, sorry, I know I'm only reporting on a different area, but it was just to say, Amy, really that I do think it is a really important piece of work and really useful, and just maybe an offer that I think the Age and Well Network would be a good forum maybe to share that presentation with as well. There's a lot of organisations and support for people 50 plus around that idea of making every contact count and knowing about that guidance, so that when they're working with people who may be eligible. And equally, I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of my other team members, but Reese, the involvement officer with people 50 plus, has engagement opportunities through the week if you wanted to bounce some of that sort of accessible language off of some of the members of those groups, then I'm sure that the team would be happy to support, because I think it's something that's really significant. I think it's a difficult thing to understand for people at often difficult times of their lives where they've hit a point of vulnerability. So just an offer really in those forums.
Thanks, Katie. I think that's really useful. I mean, some of the questions that I had, they're kind of some of it is process stuff, Amy, I guess. So, you know, an obvious question would be is will it have to go through the usual council process, this guidance? So will it have to go through corporate briefing for the council, or is that not the case in this particular?
I might have to refer to colleagues in legal, but I don't think it does, because this is a guidance document as rather than actually policy. And I appreciate you're a policy committee, but I just thought we've already got the charging policy. I suppose this is a supplementary document to support the implementation of that. Yeah.
Okay. That kind of makes sense to me. And then the other question I had was more about what's our kind of strategy for ensuring that what's the delivery mechanisms then, I guess, for this. I like some of the stuff that Hannah and Katie were talking about there. What is our strategy and the different means or methods of communication of getting this to people? Is it, you know, hard copies? Or, you know, what are we looking at with that to make sure that everybody gets who needs to get it?
Yeah, we'll certainly be asking people where they want to see it, and then that will help inform, you know, in terms of co-production. But certainly in terms of our website, it will be often, in most cases, individuals will have a one-to-one discussion with the client finance team. So there will obviously be the support there, and there'll be some communication. But social workers, you know, there will be contact with social workers more often than not as well, particularly if you're talking about sort of temporary placements or longer term placements, or because there will be a care and support plan linked to someone's financial assessment. So there are routes, but I think we want to ask people where they want to get this, and I do see this probably as a bit of an evolving guidance document as well. I think we'll learn from it, but I always think let's start somewhere and then see how we can, because more communication the better really, and then it's got that wider financial agenda, which we're obviously quite interested in, with the sort of tackling poverty angle as well. So
absolutely. Okay, and then finally for me, just the obligatory timeline question really. You know, in terms of timelines, what, you know, have we got an idea of when different phases of the different kind of milestones we're going to be hitting around this are?
Yeah, as I said at the beginning, unfortunately, this has been delayed. This was with all sort of good intentions to do it by the end of the financial year, so starting this a good few months ago. But I think one of the forums is the end of this week, so end of next week. So we're hoping to get one version out to them. I was going to send a copy after this meeting to you as members, or certainly within the week, and just some final tweaks to it. So we want to get copies out there to people, start feeding back to us, and then anticipate around a month, because it's not so much a formal consultation at this stage. It's almost still sort of co-producing it and getting to those situations. Again, we'll take a steer from our residents and partners who are sort of going to be using this document. But the pencil timeline at the moment would be around a month to get it circulated and get comments back again, and then potentially a facilitated workshop with a smaller group of just asking people what they think before ready to publish it. So within the next 2 months, that's what I'd hope. Yeah.
And I think it would be useful if at the point that you've got kind of some form of end product, Amy, if you could bring that back to the committee whenever that is. We're obviously going into election period pretty soon in terms of our democratic calendar, but even if it's into the next council period, all things being equal, there's still people PDC or whatever at that point or something similar. I think it would be good to come back just for some oversight, and it'd be interesting to see what it looks like as well.
Yeah, excellent, will do.
Okay, fab. Thanks, Amy. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you. Is it okay if I leave now? Sorry. Thank you. Nice to see everyone. Cheers.
Thanks, Amy. Okay. Next item on the agenda, then, item 5 is Children and Young People's Rights Scheme, which is a verbal update, and Katie's obviously joined us for that. So I'll hand over to you, Katie.
Hi, thank you. Firstly, apologies for missing the last meeting that I was scheduled to attend. Working from home and IT in all its glory failed quite close to the meeting, so apologies for that, and thank you for having me back. So I think the last time I saw you was in November, and it was just as the redrafted Children's Rights Scheme policy had been unanimously passed at Council. And as a part of Universal Children's Rights Day, those packs went with a covering letter from Councillor King to all schools in Swansea to introduce the new 5-principled approach to children's human rights that we've employed as a council. So since then, specifically in terms of the Children's Rights Scheme, we've been working with Swansea's Children's Rights Network to look at what those performance indicators for that scheme might look like. And it's something that came out of our evaluation from the original Children's Rights Scheme, that actually we needed smarter indicators and we needed to be able to demonstrate impact more robustly. So we've been working with 30 members of the Children's Rights Network to look within each of the 5 principles at what those performance indicators might look like. But also over the last 3 weeks in the run up to half term, Caris, our partnership and involvement officer for children and young people, and myself have been flat out working with children and young people to mirror that opportunity. Ideally, we would have brought adults and children together, but because schools are still bubbling and some of the COVID restrictions that are still in place, we've actually been holding workshops within settings, so going out to children. So in the last 3 weeks, we've seen 237 children and young people, which isn't bad, and we've been looking at what action they think the council needs to take within those 5 principles. Sorry, this would be the 5 minutes that my dogs stopped barking, if you can hear them, to see what they could take and what those measurements look like. I guess, interestingly, children and young people almost unanimously across the settings that we worked in chose to focus on the equality and non-discrimination principle and to look at what indicators might look like for that. There's a number of reasons for it. I think a lot of the children understood the idea of equality and non-discrimination more. They've been taught about it in school, that sort of diversity principles. Some chose to look at participation, but they were the principles that children almost unanimously chose. And in terms of that, the indicators they were looking for within the action plan and the scheme were things like having an accessible route to report if you feel like your rights are not being met, or to report if you feel like other children's rights are not being met in respect of discrimination. So there wasn't really an exclusive form of discrimination that children talked about. They talked about gender stereotyping, they talked about racism, they talked about LGBT discrimination, they talked about age discrimination, but having accessible routes to be able to explore that, have information and advice, but also raise if they felt like their rights were not being met. They also discussed having some indicators around perhaps a county-wide project that casts light on some of the children's rights issues around equality and non-discrimination, so I'm not getting my words out very well, and around some of those vulnerable groups of children and young people who may be less likely to access their rights. And the third really clear point that they made from it was around perhaps opportunities for shared learning. So lots of children and young people were able to talk about what they've been learning in LGBT History Month in school or Black History Month, and different celebrations and lessons that they have in terms of equality and non-discrimination. And they were asking questions about how our staff access information like that, how counsellors access information and learning about those things, and whether there were opportunities, which I said I would relay back, around children from schools being able to share their learning with counsellors and adults within the council in that sort of flip on training, I guess, where they would be able to come and bring some of what they've been learning in school about racial discrimination or LGBT discrimination and things like that. So I thought that would be quite interesting for you to know. We have a raft of information from children and young people and practitioners about performance indicators, and over the next 6 weeks we're going to be working with the Children's Rights Network in 2 working groups. One is going to look at embedding children's rights across the council, being accountable as duty bearers and equality and non-discrimination, and they'll be refining performance indicators in that part of the scheme. And then the other working group will be focusing on participation and empowerment of children and young people, so promotion of information around rights and how we listen to children and young people. So that's going really well. It's exciting. It's the first time we've involved children and young people in that sort of strategic development of our measurements, and they've really accepted it and embraced it. In terms of our statutory duty within the Children's Rights Scheme for listening to children and young people, there's been a lot of engagement work. We're definitely reaping the benefits of our team restructure that I've talked about previously, and having engagement officers both in children and young people's world, but also in 50+ as well. Our team spans the life stages. So just a few things to update you on. Our Votes at 16 project is now live, so you'll all be aware that the change in law within Welsh Government means that young people aged 16 and 17 are now eligible to vote in the forthcoming elections, and young people aged 14+ are eligible to register to vote. So we are undertaking a collaborative project with Democratic Services and with the Education Department. It's twofold. The first part is we've been working with an organisation in Swansea that's been tendered to us called Swansea MAD, so Swansea Music, Arts and Design, and they are working with 30 young people to develop a media video. It's called Your Vote, Your Future, and it's based on Back to the Future. That will be ready by the 14th of March, that we will be using for assemblies through our social media, that promotes young people's democratic right to vote and the importance to register to vote. So it's a bit like a dystopian future where young people can't vote and what would happen if young people couldn't vote. So that's the first part. But the second part is that we've recruited 19 Votes at 16 ambassadors. They're all young people. There's 19 so far. There is still some time for other settings, schools or community settings, to support us. We've got until the end of the week for them to do that. But we met with the group yesterday for the first time. They've developed resource packs for their schools and settings, and essentially their role will be to work with Caris and myself in the partnership and involvement team between next Monday, which is when they return to school, and the deadline for cut-off for register to vote, which is mid-April, to run assemblies, run class workshops, have lunch and break time sessions where we've got access to electronic material where we can support young people to know about the change in law, but also sign up and register to vote. And we'll look to measure that. We've got a baseline figure of how many young people are currently registered to vote in Swansea, and hopefully by mid-April we'll have increased that through our Votes at 16 ambassadors scheme. Some of the work that the ambassadors have also been doing is they've created like a sort of enamel pin badge so that other people can be ambassadors. Adults who work in the council will disseminate those out to those adults, and we're hoping that they can wear that as a symbol that people can ask them, public can ask them, what does Votes at 16 ambassador mean, and that they can also promote to other children and young people that they're now eligible to vote. So that's quite exciting. It's the first time we've done it, and the ambassador scheme seems to work really well. The young people are really keen to get back into their settings and take a leadership role in promoting to their peers that change. The next piece of work that I feel like a bit of a fake saying we've, Caris, my team member, works really hard with children and young people, and I just get to report it back. But we've been working regionally with the Junior Safeguarding Board, so young people from Swansea and Neath Talbot, to develop an equality resource pack, which is a conversation toolkit to look at LGBTQIA+ issues. Predominantly it's been used in schools at the moment, but there is interest in community settings. So the last time I saw you, that had been developed and was being printed. So since then, young people have facilitated sessions with the Corporate Parenting Board in Neath Talbot, the working group of Swansea CMET, which is focusing on equality and non-discrimination, and just this morning they facilitated the session with the wider Western Bay Safeguarding Board. So they did really well. You know, that's obviously very senior officers who've accepted it. You know, it's been a really positive feedback about it. In Swansea, we've also had 2 secondary schools come forward to ask for it to be rolled out and support with that. So in the last, in this period, since January, we've facilitated those conversations with over 180 young people in 2 secondary schools, where each class through a PSE day has had access to the equality pack, which is really exciting. An extension of that work has become around Swansea Council being an ally to the LGBTQIA+ community and how we represent that. So we're currently working with young people and councillors to look at, can we resource materials that we can share with the public, again a little bit like the Votes at 16 ambassador badge, that we can show as an organisation we're an ally to the community, and something that represents that people can see on us. I realise I don't come up for air, I'm nearly there. In terms of our work on young women's safety, so at our last meeting I updated you that we were working with the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office and the Children's Commissioner's Office with young women in Swansea to look at issues that they wanted to talk about falling out of the Sarah Everard, Sabina Nisa cases, and more recently, you know, Welsh cases. From that, we have been working with sports development, and we are running for the first time tomorrow an Us Girls session, which is specifically targeted at 14 to 18-year-old young women. So sports development already run girls specific sports sessions during half terms and holidays, but they haven't been age specific to older young women. So we've got a session for the first time tomorrow, and it's focusing solely on personal safety. So we have martial art and judo specialists come in to do some of the introduction to self-defense that young women have asked for, and then we're also running a consultation session with those young women who had fed back last time about having outdoor exercise spaces that they felt safe with. So they wanted to be able to use the cycle paths or the walking paths or running clubs, but actually they weren't able to drive to get to spaces where they could join with adults. So we're actually working with Park Lives and Sports Development at the moment to look at whether we can set up young women specific couch to 5k groups, so they'd run a little bit like the healthy walking leaders groups, but they would be community based running groups for young women. So that's based on what young women have said previously, but just extending that conversation to see if that's something that they still want, something they want to do, and things like that. But there is still some work to do around some of the concerns they raised around and the policies for how that is dealt with in schools and in community settings. If you wanted to report sexual harassment, how easy that is to do and how safe you might feel to do that. We're also linking in with the Purple Flag funding that has just come into the authority and the significant amount of money that's come in around the safe nighttime economy for young women 16 plus who work in the nighttime economy on Wine Street in the city centre. So helping them to feed into the wider process of what that vulnerability training looks like and what safe routes home look like for them when they're coming out of restaurants or pubs that they work in. There's only two more, I promise. Listening to learners was another priority that young people had set that is part of our forum manifesto. And in the period since I reported last, there has been a pupil voice learning community that has come together. It's facilitated by Bishopstown Comprehensive. We attend and support it, and actually it was a really, really positive session. All of the comprehensive schools were represented, and young people were able to come and talk about what the priorities are within their schools in terms of pupil voice, and then what a coordinated collective manifesto for pupil voice, so issues in schools, would look like that they will present to council in the coming months. We're supporting that learning community, and also then looking at how we extend that beyond secondary schools to primary schools as well, and that is specifically about thinking about the issues that young people face in education and what we do as a council to support them to address that. And then similarly, a priority for children and young people out of our original consultation was about engaging disabled children and what we do as a council to support disabled children to be heard in an integrated way. We have been working with Ysgol Pen-y-Bryn and the Children's Commissioner's Office to pilot a new project. It's based on embedding the principles of the Council's Children's Rights Scheme into their new curriculum, and that involves a package of inset training, mapping. So children and young people at Pen-y-Bryn and teachers have been working together to look at what they already do well in terms of embedding children's rights and listening to their learners, but then also where the gaps are and what needs to happen to move forward. So we're working with learners at Pen-y-Bryn and the teachers to co-produce an action plan for embedding rights in their curriculum, and that's our first step really in looking at sustainable, free at point of contact processes for embedding rights and teaching about rights in the curriculum. And that's been recognised as good practice. It's been picked up by the Children's Commissioner's Office for Wales, who are using some of our training that we've produced, and also have taken that as a case study as they're developing a new guide to support schools to embed the requirements of the Curriculum and Assessment Act and the Additional Learning Needs Act in terms of not only now understanding the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child in teaching, but also the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities as well, which is a big step forward. So we're working with Education and the Children's Commissioner's Office to bridge that gap, but also work with children and young people to co-produce that and to better understand what we need to do to listen and integrate in a meaningful way. And conscious as always, that's a lot of information that I just throw out, but I'm open to any questions. Yeah, thank you.
How's that, Katie?
Breathe.
There's a lot there, wasn't there? What strikes me is you've got a very interesting job in your department, haven't you? There's lots of different things, isn't it? Fair play.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go on.
Okay. Any thoughts, questions, Katie? I know there's got a lot in there. We started off with the Children and Young People's Rights Scheme. Looked at the Vote to 16 project, the Young Women's Safety, Student Safeguarding Board, and the Listening to Learners and Disabled Children. But at the end, I think that's everything. Yeah. So, any thoughts or comments on any of those items? Anything at all? I mean, I've got a couple of things. The obligate, or Jan, you come in first, Con.
Yeah. Just on the 16-year-old votes, Katie. It'll be interesting to see how that pans out, because I don't think many came forward in the last election. I'm hoping more will come out this time, because I think it's good to get the youngsters involved in politics and to see exactly who's making decisions for them and whatever. So it'll be interesting to see the response on the 16-year-old vote.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it probably was important to note that this time around, Welsh Government have allocated funding to democratic services as well for staff capacity to specifically increase registration of young people and foreign nationals. So we're working with Selma and democratic services around that. But yeah, it'll be good. Obviously, we hope that we'll see a substantial increase in the number of young people who register to vote and come out. So it'll be interesting to see.
It's difficult sometimes to get adults to understand how to fill in a form. Never mind 16-year-olds when they've never had to do it before. So it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we're talking about that, I think I was just thinking, Katie, in terms of Welsh Government or whoever Welsh Government used to produce the data on how many 16 to 18-year-olds vote. I mean, I'm just wondering what, you've mentioned a couple of things that we're doing to increase that. I just wonder, have we got sort of mechanisms, or what are the council's obligations, and what mechanisms do we have in place in terms of looking at that post-election, with a view to maybe coming up with an action plan for addressing that going forward? I mean, some people might think it's not the council's place to be increasing 16 to 18-year-old percentage of them, the number of them who vote. But it seems to me that given that this is a new demographic that's voting for the same reasons Jan was talking about, there needs to be some scaffolding there, doesn't it? Certainly. Yeah. I mean, colleges and sixth form colleges, and even comprehensives, not just with sixth forms, but working with children as they go into the GCSE years, when they're 14, 15.
Got to point out how important it is for them to vote, that they will have a say, that they can do something about it. So I think it's really important that, being as they've been given the vote, is that they use it.
Yeah.
And not waste it.
I guess what I'm asking, and you may not be the person to answer this, Katie, but I guess what I'm asking is that, do we have an idea of how we're going to review this afterwards to see the impact, the impact of the work that we've done pre-election, and what we need to learn from that going forward? I guess that's my question, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so, and it may be something that I need to go away and have the conversation about. I think some of it we've given thought to in a crude way, if you like. So we've got a baseline of how many are registered now, and we can look at how many are registered later. Although obviously we can't say that everything is because of the work that we've done, but we can assume that some of it is a part of that. I think that there are wider conversations that I'm not always best placed to speak on, because I don't understand it necessarily around why target 14 to 16-year-olds to register to vote amidst any other demographic of the community. And I think you've touched on it, because it's a new change in law, then let us address that. And I think also because children and young people raised it as a priority when we went out to look at what should the forum be looking at. Actually, political literacy was one of those, and that's a really fine line for the council about what our role is and how do we provide information to children, young people, or anybody else about party information when we have to remain neutral. So I think our role in it can be to promote people's right to democratic voice, to promote the links to be able to register to vote, potentially in the future look at where do you access information about parties, but we can't take you there to it, and things like that. But I think in terms of the impact of it, I think the impact of this project we can evaluate in terms of how young people feel. We'll also, when we're in schools and settings, be able to manually count how many people we support to sign up, so we can directly look at that. But I think there is a wider conversation after that about what the council's role is, what the expectations are, and how we move forward in terms of that, not only registering to vote, but that wider access to information and understanding about democracy and about the electoral process and how people can engage in that sort of politics with a little p rather than the politics with the big P, you know.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, okay. Well, thanks, Katie. Thanks for that. Anybody else want to come in on any of the other items that Katie talked about? I've got it's a bit of a cliche question to ask you this, because I think you ask this every single time you come here, but the question is around how are we ensuring that, I'm talking about the children's rights scheme in particular, but how are we ensuring that children and people are less likely to engage are able to feed in some way into the work, I guess. You know, we always ask you that question, but I think it's an important question.
Yeah, and do you know what? My answer probably changes every time, and it's probably not sufficient every time I get it. I think of one of the things that has been working really well from COVID is that we've, rather than bringing people together in limited number, we're now offering a sort of workshop style approach where we hold online bookings and then we are going out to individual sessions. So one of the drawbacks is that you haven't got necessarily that collaborative approach in one space from across the authority, but what we have got is wider access to single communities, if you like. So for example, with the children's rights scheme, we've gone out to 11 schools and community settings, but you see the whole class, or you see the whole community. So for example, you know, like mixed up youth club or something, you see that whole community perhaps rather than one or two coming in. There is a benefit to that. We have been collecting data around demographics of the children that are involved, so you know, whether they're statement in, whether they possess protected characteristics, without being intrusive of that, but from schools and settings around the information, largely somewhat to look at whether we are extending our offer and it's inclusive, but also to understand right from the outset what support needs children need. So for example, I've been into settings this week where, you know, maybe 10% of the group are statemented, and then looking at and making sure that there's enough support, that there's enough staff there. You know, we've increased the reach of the age of the children that we've been working with. You know, I feel proud to say that we've been working with children sort of 7, 8, 9 on performance indicators for the children's rights scheme. That, you know, when you put it in that language, it's a really conceptual and complex thing, but it's never perfect. It's never a reach that is as far as we'd like it to be in terms of vulnerable children. But we are lucky that we work with the early years team, we work with participation officers in child and family services to try and extend that and measure it, which I think we're getting better at, and hopefully we can put some indicators into the Children's Rights Scheme Action Plan that clearly define what that means in terms of equality and non-discrimination. So who are the children and young people that we're not reaching, and what are the specific indicators that we need to do that? And I'll bring that back to you, because I think that's a conversation perhaps that there'll be something tangible on paper, and then we can explore that and amend it. Is that okay?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Katie. Paxton?
Thank you, Chairman. I thought somebody ought to ask a question somewhere along the line, because Katie explains everything so well and we don't normally ask many questions. But you did mention the word safeguarding, Katie. And obviously kids safeguarding has got specific connotations in terms of the council, in terms of our safeguarding policy, and also within child and family services in terms of keeping children safe from harm, basically is what it amounts to, I guess, at the end of the day. The safeguarding you were talking about, is that basically the same thing, or are you looking at something a slightly different connotation in that respect?
No, I think there's some bits. So the safeguarding in terms of what I was talking about was the remit of the Western Bay Safeguarding Board. So there are specific themes that they have set as priorities: child sexual exploitation, county lines, things like that. And then there is some scope within that safeguarding forum to look at issues that children and young people think are important, that may be wider, more contextual safeguarding concerns. So not necessarily safeguarding from harm in terms of exploitation or abuse, but those cultural and contextual safeguarding things. So what harm might come to you as a young person because you are a woman or because you are a member of the LGBT community? Is that a disproportionately, are people who identify as a woman or as homosexual, for example, disproportionately safe, or are they treated with equality? So I guess in terms of safeguarding, I think perhaps my work is more contextual safeguarding and that more universal approach to equality and keeping people safe. But we do some specific work, for example, with care experienced children, young people, and those what matter conversations with Child and Family Services, which are then more explicitly about safeguarding, protection from harm, protection from abuse, and making sure that they're safe within our corporate parenting processes. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is it is a little bit broader than the very narrow context in terms of safeguarding, as far as we understand it in those specific terms in terms of policies.
Yeah,
thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, Paxton. Okay, and then finally, Kate, I just wanted to ask, or just raise a point really about the young women's safety work that you're doing, and I missed a little bit at the start, so apologies if I missed this. But is community safety within the council involved in that? Because you mentioned, I just
sorry, I should have said that. I'm always conscious about what I fed back before, and then the progress on. So community safety, community integration, the domestic violence service, the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office and the Children's Commissioner's Office, we're all working together, and education and sports development. So there's a working group of these are the issues that young women have talked about. So school policies, we sort of pass on to education and work with young people on that. Women specific exercise we'll pass on to sports development. Martial arts, self-defense sort of stuff is going more towards that domestic violence, to look at some of the safeguards around that. There are some issues about equipping women with self-defense opportunities and then not being in a safe situation to employ them either. So we've got a broad working group that when these specific issues come up, who are the experts, who are the people best placed to work with young people to influence change in this area, and that sort of signpost and referral to those different areas. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
I'll bring Steve in and then Erica. Steve?
Yeah, you, Kerry, just triggered a little bit of grey matter myself. You mentioned a lot of areas of work there, Katie, but you seem to be missing out business, because, if you think of safeguarding or, women being safe and all parties being safe, not just women, in the city centre, where is your links with business? Because they got a key part to play in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of it, some of it, I guess, isn't my place to report, because I know that we met with South Wales Police and the Community Integration Service last week, and I think part of their women's safety in the nighttime economy work is focusing around businesses, and that is within the city centre and the nighttime economy, but looking at how we train and support staff in those businesses in the private sector to understand what women's safety means, to understand or to negotiate those processes if women don't feel safe in those spaces. I think there is a conversation about how we extend that to daytime when young people are out and about in Swansea. Young people have made a lot of reference to Swansea city centre during the days, and how we can equip and support and collaborate with businesses to make sure that there's safe spaces for young people if they feel like they're being harassed or followed or whatever it is in the day as well as the night. So I think there is work going on under Purple Flag and the nighttime economy and the police grants that have been done, but I don't think I'm expert enough to talk on that point. I think that work is happening, but because a lot of it involves 18 plus in the nighttime economy in pubs and restaurants and things like that. I haven't really dabbled in it, if that makes sense. But it's a fair point also for other areas of work that we do about engaging the private sector more than we do, for sure.
Yeah, because this private sector will be providing the safe places and
Yeah.
the safe places.
Yeah.
As you say, it's not just at night time, it's
No.
day as well. So I think we've got to be careful where we focus, because there's always that grey area on the gap between the daytime economy finishing, nighttime starting, and that in-between bit. You know, some of older members on here will remember the differences when pubs shut. I'm looking at Paxton, he's ignoring me. When pubs used to shut and the nighttime economy started, and there's still that gap.
Yeah.
So I think that is an area to look at. But businesses will help you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll take note, and maybe we could catch up and look at that in a little more detail. I guess in terms of what young people so far have said about businesses is about working in them and then leaving work, so 16, 17-year-olds, but I think there's room for expansion on that conversation. Thank you.
So sorry, Chairman, I got to come back in on that and tell Steve, sadly I'm not old enough to remember the days when they used to check out the pubs at 10:30, but those days are long gone, I guess.
Yeah. Erica?
Sorry, Chairman.
That's okay. Erica. You're on mute, Erica.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. Thanks. I'm still rubbish at all this. Katie, thank you so much for all your covering. And I've got to say, well, I'm listening, my head's going off into all sorts of spasms about other things. And we've talked a little bit about the police now since Steve's come in as well. But I was wondering in the past what you were talking about, which I can't quite remember all, but if the police were involved in those groups when we were talking about, you know, what groups are looking at what issues, because I sit on some of them with my colleagues on some of the domestic abuse committees and the working groups there, and child sexual abuse is a big concern, and we're doing a lot. We're doing, you know, looking at what you're saying and being aware, and with everything that's going on, I know we're trying our best, but I know we're also missing a lot, is the child sexual abuse that goes on in the home. Now, the police have explained to me that that's two different kind of things that they're looking at, but to me it's really important how we get to monitor, wrong word, I don't think that's right, but how we get to understand what we can do in the home, because it's really close, that, and when we're focusing everywhere out, and I sometimes think we're missing, because it's too close, about the children that are suffering it absolutely in silence until something happens. And it's pretty tragic. So I don't want to put you on the spot. I think what I'm doing is raising awareness about that issue, and I will now, because it's life. It's not just life threatening. It's life changing, and it destroys for long periods of time unless somebody gets help. So, is there anything you can say that we're doing on that?
I can't specifically say, but I do with confidence say that as an authority there are experts and specialists within child and family services who work, I'm sure, incredibly hard on what is a really difficult subject. In terms of listening to children and young people around those issues, I haven't personally done any work on it, and I know that there are issues around people's well-being and people who come forward to say those things. This probably doesn't answer your question, because I'm not sure I can answer it. I think that there's really specific departments and teams in child and family services that would deal with that. But I think in terms of the children's rights scheme, and something that we need to really hone in on and promote, is that in that rights education to children, we have to promote that you have the right to be safe, and we have to promote that you have the right not to be abused or to be exploited, and that those things that might have been normal all your life to you are not normal things, and that you have the right to be free from that, so that we can increase the number of people who disclose and come forward and be supported. And then perhaps in that process, it may already happen, we learn about children's experiences and how to prevent that in future. I don't feel well placed to comment on what goes on in the authority, but I think we can do that, and I think there is a space for that trauma-informed approach as well. But that's my personal opinion, and that's another hat as a student. I think there's space for us to understand trauma.
Absolutely, thank you. Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to bring this up. Katie, I know it's not, I know what you've got a very overarching, and it's massive, and nobody's expecting you to go in and do those detailed jobs. But I think we just need to be more aware as counsellors. I'm sure in your departments you are very clear, but I'm not so sure we are with everything that children need and everything that we can do to help. And I think for me, it's getting it out there that they're safe to speak, that they can come to somebody, you know. And I just want to say thank you for all the work that you're doing, and Kerry chairing this and allowing us to bring in all the aspects that affect children, because it's huge. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Paxton and then Steve.
Hi, Chairman. Erica will probably be aware, I think, Erica, that our next meeting in Child and Family Services, the performance panel, we'll be looking very closely now at the CSE report that came out as a result of what happened up in Rosslyn in 2014, I think. And obviously there have been a lot of opportunities there for you to ask those questions, because there will be senior officers there who will have that sort of knowledge around that, which Katie probably hasn't got at this stage, to be fair to her. Yeah. So I think that will be useful anyway, and hopefully we'll get some lessons coming out of that as well.
Yeah. And I think it's a valid question that within that data that we'd have about number of cases or number of assessments or number of disclosures, it's a valid question to ask that within the remit of ensuring that children's well-being is protected, where's their voice in it? So those that do feel safe to come forward, are there avenues where we can ask about what they need or how we prevent that in the future? So I think that's a valid point to see through some of that data and your experience as well.
I think the only thing I would add to that is when we're looking at that report, it is in terms of a particular context in the way that children were groomed at that point in time, which is slightly different from what you were saying, Erica, about exploitation in the home, isn't it? And that is something that needs to be talked about at the same time, I think.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Patrick. Steve and then Yvonne.
Yeah, I think Erica has raised a couple of good issues there, and exploitation in the home is always a very difficult challenge. But I sit on the education panel, and we've raised that a number of times in the panel, because teachers, particularly at primary level, are probably the ones who will identify issues in the home before anybody else. And I think this is where we need to link these together and come at it holistically, as Paxton's just raised and as Kate. And it's a model that will never have an easy answer, because it is one that does happen. And very often, from my experience, the children feel as if it's their fault that it's happened, which is totally wrong. You know, I got 3 granddaughters after having 3 sons, and I can see the difference. And I'm glad I had 3 sons, but and it is a challenge. There isn't an answer. I think we just bring it all together.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And then Yvonne.
Thanks, Chair. My question is a follow on what's just been said, especially by Erica. But do we? I know. You know, as has been said, children often, they have the voice, the information is out there, but quite often they still don't know where to turn, because ultimately, if it's in the home, it's your parent. So you're like between a rock and a hard place. So I was wondering, do we have facility for, I'm sorry, I can't think of the word, but like a box where they can put in, I'm having this problem. So they don't actually have to see anyone, but they can disclose anonymously. Is my question. Because I know we all say they have a voice, we all think we have a voice, but there's some things we're just not willing or able to voice for all those different reasons. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that came through, I'm trying to sort of speak on what I know and my remit, I guess. One of the things that came through from children and young people when we engaged with them was that within very local settings, their community setting or their school setting, where Councillor Gallagher, you mentioned, you know, where you've got a trusted adult like a teacher or a youth worker and things like that, people feel like their ability to speak is easier, or there are systems like comment boxes, you know, anonymous suggestion boxes. So one of the things that came through from that engagement process was that how do we do that on a county-wide level? And one of the gaps that we're still yet to get to, I guess, in terms of the forum priorities that children and people said, was that quiet voices. So it touches a little bit on how do we extend our reach to very vulnerable children, but also how do we enable the voice of children and young people who may not choose to attend forums, they just may not want to, they may not have the confidence to, or they may not be able to for some of the reasons that you've talked about. You know, this is my family, these are very personal, very specific, sometimes traumatic issues. So I think as an authority we need to look at is what systems can we put in place where people could anonymously raise issues in the authority, or not anonymously raise them, but be able to raise them without having to speak face to face with somebody. Does that make sense? So a little bit like you might have seen tools like Mike Cymru. So Mike Cymru is a national advocacy organisation where you can drop a message online to a trained professional who works in Mike. So you might disclose there and then somebody might get back to you. So it takes away that sort of horror, if you like, of having to see a face and say this is happening to me, that shame and those things, if you don't have a trusted adult like a teacher or a social worker or a youth worker. And I think that's our next step, to look at how we engage those quiet voices, and I think perhaps working with experts in other departments to look at that very specific stuff about disclosing safeguarding issues. You know, we've been looking at it in terms of people who don't want to talk about county-wide issues in meetings but might want to input their ideas about their local park or their classroom or things like that, but perhaps there's opportunity for very specific work around safeguarding.
Okay, thanks, Katie.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
That's for that. I think, you know, we have to remember your remit is you know, you're not working in child protection or safeguarding specifically, are you? But you've got that overarching thing. I think out of that conversation really came a couple of really interesting topics that the PDC could look at, not in this council term anyway, but maybe if it's still in existence, whatever happens, we don't know what's going to happen to me in come May. But if there's something similar to this come after the election, I think there's a couple of areas that would be interesting to look at from a policy perspective. So what you just spoke about there, Katie, around quiet voices in safeguarding, seems like a really interesting area to look at. I think also, just to finish off in this area, I think that young women's safety, it strikes me that, you know, the kind of package of different things that you were talking about that you're doing to consult with children and young people around young women's safety, I think that's an area as well that we could be really looking at in terms of our policies up to scratch with that. You know, we've already got existing policies that you would think should provide for that, but I think there's definitely a kind of a feed into policy around that as well, because I think a little bit with young women's safety or women's safety in general, certainly young women's safety, we've taken out the eye off the ball a little bit in the last couple of years. I think Sarah has really shone a light on that, and then I think we've kind of got a little bit complacent because there's been a number of really good community safety projects over the years since the 80s around this area, isn't there? But I think we have maybe forgotten a little bit about that as an issue. So I think perhaps after the PDC, I might get in touch with you again, Katie, around that going in the future. I don't think we'll have time to do it, to be honest, between now and May. There's 2 meetings, and we haven't got a meeting in April, I don't think, Alison, have we? So it's just literally one committee left, so we won't have time to do that. But thanks very much for coming today and feeding it. It's really interesting, and you know, continue the good work. It sounds fascinating, all the stuff that you're doing. Yeah, Really good. So thanks very much for your time, and thanks for coming in, and thanks to
Thank
everybody else
you.
for contributing.
Hope I haven't fried your brains too much. It's lovely to see you, and hopefully see you again in the future at some point to look at the progress. Thank you.
Okay,
Have a good night.
Thanks, Katie.
Yeah.
Okay, so the last item on the agenda is just the work plan. Alison, I think we've got a couple of items that were pushed forward to next month. You can remind me because my brain's gone a bit, it's gone to sleep a little bit.
Yeah, bear with me. The items for next month, 23rd of March, are an update on employability, an update on the Swansea Council volunteering strategy development, and a young carers strategy update. Perfect.
Okay. So if there's no more comments or queries or questions about the work plan, I'll just remind you to thank the officers for the support, and thanks to Alison in particular for your ongoing support. Thanks to you all for your attendance, and I'll see you next month. Take care.